Thank you for joining us today again on Harambe Talks. Today we have an amazing guest. We have Jeff Kremer, and you'll know that name, especially if you saw The Conservation Game, which is another amazing documentary that aims for the same thing that the Harambe movie is aiming for, which is to check the question, is it a good idea to be keeping these animals in captivity? So Jeff Kremer's here today to talk to us. We're going to talk about all kinds of aspects about the zoo, what's happening at the zoo, and he has a lot of experience, both as an animal rights advocate, but also as somebody that worked in the zoo industry and somebody that knows from the inside exactly how things work. So for the first time, we'll really be able to get the inside scoop and talk to somebody that really knows what's happening and go over all these different aspects that the zoo, normally they control the narrative, and people like Jeff get up there and disrupt that narrative and offer that narrative a new opening where more facts can be brought in. And we all believe that an educated consumer is the only hope our future has. So the best thing we can do is to continue to educate everybody on the truth and not just the stories being told by the zoos. So without much further, we're going to go ahead and bring in Jeff today. Here we go. Hey, Jeff.
Hey, good to see you, Eric.
Great to see you today. Thanks for joining. It's a real honor to have you on. It's not just because we're kind of bald brothers, but just two bald guys talking about conservation.
There you go.
So to start with, I would love to, I really want to get into a lot of these zoo topics. And what I'd like to do is to start by talking about, I want to say your experience at the zoo and what changed you during that experience.
You know, we call our time at the zoo the best of times. It really was, and the worst of times, because we couldn't have evolved as animal welfare advocates had we not lived that experience of having animals escape. And I mean, we'll get into that later, but it was the escapes, the accidents, the deaths of the animals, and learning the business of zoo. That was really critical for me. As an animal advocate, is there's two sides to every zoo. So there's going to be the animal caretakers and there's going to be the operations side, and that's in every zoo. So what we found was the animal caretakers were just like us. They're altruistic. 99% of the people that were animal caretakers at our zoo were just like us. They would give their lives for the animals. But we found out, and I worked for operations as well and reported to the top three individuals at the zoo, the operations side is all about dollars. And so what we found was when push came to shove, when you start butting heads, the business side, the operations side, generally always won the discussion. And I just countless examples of that. So we evolved from the AZA zoological world, and that's when I became quite educated about the ZAA as well. So both AZA and the ZAA, the Zoological Association of America. And we evolved to go work for, my wife became part-time education director at Big Cat Rescue in Tampa at a GFAS accredited big cat sanctuary.
And now, just so everybody knows, when we talk about these accredited things, there's the AZA, the American Zoo and Aquarium, Zoological and Aquarium, and there's the ZAA, which you had mentioned. Now, both of these are, from what I understand, these are, they give accreditation, but they are volunteer participants. It's not like a real regulatory body that does anything. That goes to the USDA. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, it's volunteer. They actually, it's as the AZA touts themselves, the gold standard, air quotes, of the zoological world, but they actually pay to be members. So it's a very stringent. There's accreditation inspections are every 5 years. I'm not sure of the timeline of the ZAA's inspections, but the AZA and as the years go on, the AZA and the ZAA are kind of weaving together, which is a very, very powerfully scary and disheartening thing that I've been observing over the past, probably since 2004, 2005. And so it's voluntary. They actually want those accreditations because you know what? They tout it. and they make money off of it. But it's a lot of standards, a lot of rigorous standards. Not so much for the ZAA, but that's improving over the years. But just real quickly before I forget thought, when I was working at the AZA accredited zoo in Tampa, it was known as Lowry Park Zoo, and now it's Zoo Tampa. While I was employed there, our CEO was on the board of directors of the ZAA. So that's how I became familiar with the ZAA.
Wow.
And yeah, well, and it was more nefarious than that because the ZAA was, it was like the Wild Wild West back then. And they actually were just getting started. So our CEO being on board of directors actually allowed the ZAA to use Lowry Park Zoo's address as the ZAA's mailing address. And they allowed a ZAA employee to use, they used office space there to operate out of. So it was just the nefarious operations began back in 2004, 2005 timeframe. So this nefarious partnership had the roots were planted, over a decade ago.
It's amazing to know that they literally came from the same space.
Absolutely. Yeah, we couldn't believe it.
It's like Congress investigating Congress. Amazingly, nobody ever does anything wrong. Now, I wanted to talk about the zoo that you worked with. That was AZA accredited, right?
Yeah, it was Zoo Tampa now in Lowry Park Zoo at the time. And it was AZA accredited. It's been AZA accredited for decades.
Now, did you guys have a dart team there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was, we had the response team, and the weapons were locked up in the commissary, and as were, so there's response for everything. And I was in security for a couple of years. So we were not in security. We were not the dart team people. It was going to be the animal caretakers, the CEO, and the veterinarian.
Gotcha. Okay. So when you were there, okay, so everybody kind of thinks of the zoo. There's a great PR campaign. Everybody thinks, oh, it's this nice, lovely place, and we'll go and we'll see some happy animals and we'll have fun and everybody's happy, everybody wins, and it's a safe place to go for the day. Now it's marketed towards children. I don't see a lot of, maybe there are some adults that like to go alone or as a date or something, but for the most part, what we experienced at least was always seeing families there. So now you have this kind of like Disney version, G-rated version of how everything works there. Now, what we want to know is, in your experience, were there deaths at the park? Were animals killed there? Or how often did escapes happen? Like what was your experience as far as seeing that?
What we came to learn personally is, we've got concerns all across the board, from visitor safety, employee safety, animal welfare. We were experiencing animal escapes, and this is not, I'll give you a worst case scenario that happened just after my tenure, after I chose to leave. But I had the employees that were involved call me because of my involvement with security. But you mentioned escapes. We had Inshallah was just a magnificent Sumatran tiger who got out. I think it was around the 2006 timeframe, got out due to human error. Like you're saying, if you just Google zoo animal escapes, it's happening more frequently. What's unique is that the core denominator continues to be similar, and that is in our case at Zoo Tampa or Lowry Park Zoo, the Asia department of all the animals included, the species included there, it included your tapirs and bears and Sumatran tigers. And what happened was, just like it's a business, right? So people go to a zoo thinking it's all about animals. Well, it's a business based on animals, captive animals. And so in this case, the Asia department was short-staffed at the end of the day. The assistant curator of the department had to take her child home from the zoo school because the child had become sick. So they left one employee with less than a year of experience in charge to close down the whole Asia domain. All the animals. And his only experience, I think, was at a bat conservancy in northern Florida. So he was left to do it all by himself. And he made that, and it's not his fault, he made that fatal error because he'd been left in charge of something that he shouldn't have been left in charge of. And he left a night house gate open, and that Sumatran tiger got out of her enclosure in the night house, and they called it code 1. So code 1 would be animal escape. Code 2 was a human in an animal enclosure. I think code 3 was a venomous snake bite. So in this case, they called code 1. All the guests, it was toward the end of the day, all the guests were, rushed into buildings. All the animal caretakers, went to that DART response team and went to damage control. And what happened was the CEO was on his way home to Dade City, where he had his wildlife park and hundreds of exotic animals that he was swapping between the zoo and his park. So he drove immediately, rushed back to the zoo. He had the weapon, and they tried to tranquilize, inshallah. And, everybody thinks, oh, you just, tranquilize the animal, you shoot a dart, goes to sleep, and everything is moved to safe and secure. Well, darting an animal is an imperfect science at best. And when you're darting a Sumatran tiger, 350, 400-pound tiger from a distance, you're lucky if you get the dart to stick the first time. And it's probably going to agitate the animal. And then it's going to take a while for that chemical to become effective. And it didn't happen. And so the CEO was standing by with the weapon, and he made the decision to shoot and kill. I think he put 6 shots in her and killed her. And so that was a worst case. So fast forward, during our tenure, we had animal escapes probably in the incidents of probably about average of at least once a month, and sometimes more, not very often less. But it's not going to be your Sumatran tiger. But for example, we had brought in elephants from Swaziland. We under the guise of we're saving them from being culled. When in fact all it was our zoo and San Diego Zoo paying the king of Swaziland X number of hundreds of thousands of dollars to bring 7 elephants back from Swaziland, because elephants are the big draw at any zoo. And so we took 3 in San Diego, took the other 4. I mean, it was a 747 long. It's a book was written about it. But when they weren't able to get the elephants to breed successfully, so they brought in some experts, from overseas and artificially impregnated. That's being kind, and actually had a birth. But when that baby was born, I mean, that baby elephant, we didn't have yards that were built for baby elephants. So the baby elephant, got out underneath the huge, restricted barriers for the adult elephants. And the baby elephant, well, during my tenure, it must have gotten out probably at least 3 times. I can't begin to count the number of times that animals escaped enclosures. Sometime, I'd say, on a fairly regular basis, it's either due to human error, or in many cases, I know of enclosures that were built public areas where the keepers wanted to build barriers higher, but they couldn't build them higher because operations said, no, that 6-foot fence would obstruct the view of the wattled crane or the elephant or whatever species of animal was behind that barrier. So I want you to build the barrier 4 feet. And I mean, you think wattled crane from Africa. Well, it's just a bird, right? Well, those birds have a beak that can pierce a human skull, right? Well, during my tenure, I know the wattled cranes got out 5 or 6 times. And, you get, call code 1, you get the nets out, everybody responds. But this just went on and on and on. We had alligator get out. We had small primates get out, which it's a regular occurrence. And if you just Google zoo escapes, I mean, at one time this past in 2022, I'm keeping track of all these statistics for escapes and deaths and things like that. And I think in a 1-month period, I documented 5 or 6 serious escapes. And you're talking bears, rhinoceroses, just everything you can imagine. So it's a regular occurrence. The zoos have a method of operation that's damage control. Luckily with social media, if there's visitors there, chances are they're going to have trouble, putting a spin on it. So when it's documented, you'll see almost every single story you'll see in the newspaper is, oh, it was a brief escape. It escaped briefly, or no one was at risk. And it's all a PR campaign. One of our damage control assessment methods in our zoo was, if we had an animal get out, we shut down the sky ride because we didn't want people taking pictures of animals running around. I mean, you wanted to stop, and it was get people in buildings, shut down the rides. It's a very orchestrated business of PR.
How, in your experience, how much pull did they have with their? I guess their PR teams are probably top notch. Did they have a lot of pull with like local newspapers, local news agencies, and things to kind of? Were they allowed to sort of write their own narrative, so to speak?
Yeah, so I'd like to share a personal story with you. I was working in security, and it speaks directly to what you're speaking about. I actually made a note so I didn't forget it. I was working security at the front gate one afternoon, and on my two-way radio, I heard a deafening scream. It was ineligible, but I knew that either likely an animal was dying or a human was dying. Something horrible was going on. All I could decipher from it was primate. So I beeline for our primate section, which is a large section with everything from chimpanzee. We didn't have any gorillas, but we had chimpanzees, colobus, and smaller primates. And what had happened was our zoo had brought in. We had an alpha male chimpanzee that had been at the zoo. I believe he was donated. He was a former pet, came from Africa, was donated to the zoo probably in the late 1989 by a docent who actually was a docent at the zoo. He and his wife realized after the chimp grew up that it's not safe. So he was donated to the zoo, and Herman was his name. And fast forward, we brought in a younger male chimp to integrate into the family unit. And unfortunately, we had a very, very small chimpanzee outdoor yard. It's beautiful, but it's very small square footage wise, beautiful waterfall and moat and things like that. And what had happened was, in the integration, this has gone on for a while, the young male chimp decided he wanted to take on the alpha male older chimp. And he started beating the life out of Herman. And so I witnessed, probably from my perspective, my job was in security to get all the visitors out of the area. The animal caretakers were doing exactly what they've been trained to do. They got the fire hoses out. They were trying to separate the chimps, get the other chimps, the females, back into the night houses, shift them back in. This is all happening in probably a 10-minute time frame. I got all the guests out, they're all taking pictures and thought, oh, they're just playing. Oh, they were, and Herman was being beaten to death. And I saw probably one of the most heroic things. Once we get all the visitors out, the fire hoses weren't working. Once we got all the females back into the night houses, I saw with two chimpanzees, and they finally were getting the young male chimp shifted back into the night house. But I saw, nobody ever testified to it, but I saw two human individuals go in and risk their lives to try to save Herman, and dragged his body back into the night house while there was still another. Anyway, fast forward, he was rushed to the medical clinic. They worked into the night to try to save him, and unfortunately, he was not saved, and Herman lost his life as a result of that incident. Speaking to your point, what happened after that, I was approached by one of our animal caretaking friends, and he says, hey, Jeff, I just want to make sure that you and your wife are aware of the fact that you're on a blacklist. And I'm like, a blacklist? What are you talking about? He says, well, what happened was somebody at the zoo leaked to the press of what went on. And I'm telling you what, it is a good old boy network, and our CEO was an alpha male himself. And he was incensed that this got leaked to the press. So they were auditing phone records, email records. They were interviewing anybody they thought might have been suspect to leaking this to the press. And everybody knew, my wife and I, as animal advocates, we were proud of that. But he suspected us as being potential people that might have leaked it to the press. And I looked at my caretaking friend and said, well, I'll tell you what, first and foremost, if I had done that, I would wear the flag proud to expose the zoo for what happened. We were not the people that did that, but that blacklist and that investigation went on for probably a couple, 3 weeks. And it got very intense. I mean, he put people in the hot seat, and became another ugly period of time in our tenure at the zoo. And to my knowledge, they never figured out who leaked it to the press. So no, they don't have the only close relationship, the PR department has a very good working relationship, and that is strictly for one thing. And that is, if a baby's born, if you're having a zoo event, Zubu or Wild Wonderland, or any time a baby's born, they want to get that into the press, the local newspaper, and on TV. Yes, so they have a very close working relationship only for the good things. At least that was our experience. They don't want to see sad. They don't want to see anything negative. So it's damage control for bad, and it's PR for good. That was our total experience.
Interesting. Wow. Well, that sorry, that story is really it's really powerful. That must have been
there are so many, Eric, I could tell you so many experiences that broke our hearts. And that's what after 4 years, after a couple of years of really trying hard to do something good, we're like, this is, it's not welcome. I mean, I'll give you another example of how it's animal welfare, right? So all zoos generally have nuisance animal abatement. So, zoos have pigeons and rats. And so in security, it was our job as security to set the trap, because they don't want to pay somebody extra. So you've got security 3 shifts, generally one person at least in many zoos, one security officer per shift in, a mid-sized zoo at the time. And so we had to go around, set the traps after hours. We had to pick the traps up in the morning. So, second shift would set the traps, first shift would pull the traps, or third shift might at the end of their shift. But also for pigeons, they put up the nets and they put up the spikes and all those kind of things. You have these beautiful faux caves where the guests go in, the visitors go in and get to see animals through glass. But that's pigeons like to hover up there. So I got a call on the radio one day, and security said, security 25 was security's number. So I got a call on the radio 25. There's a report of a gentleman walking down the service road with a rifle. And, so I immediately responded, well, what it turned out to be was the pest control company had come early and shouldn't have, but came early, and they generally, after hours, they would shoot the pigeons with a .22. And so during my tenure, they came to security and they wanted to cut that. They want to save some money. So they came and said, we're going to, we want the security department to be in charge of pigeon abatement and take the .22 and shoot the pigeons after hours. And I flat out, that of course was a line that I wasn't even going to consider. So I'm back and said, well, I can guarantee you right now, I'm not going to do it. And if you force the security department to undertake that responsibility, I talked to my officers, you're going to lose 3/4 of your department. We're not going to do that, period. So it's just story after story. It's a business based on animals, and there is so much room for animal welfare concerns, human safety concerns. It went on. I could tell you 150, 200 stories of similar instances from every species you can imagine. If somebody told me that, I'd be like, that's, nonsense, that I can't even imagine that happening at an AZA accredited zoo. I'm telling you, zoos, while there are differences obviously between sizes and who's running them, there are the biggest, like San Diego and Cincinnati and Columbus, Zoo Miami. But the business of zoos is pretty similar. The way they operate, the method of operation, policies and procedures. There are some nuances, but I guarantee the things that were happening at our zoo, I guarantee you I've seen them happen at zoos across the country on a regular basis since my tenure in Tampa in 2001.
Whether you love zoos or don't like zoos, one thing we all have in common is we love animals. So, no matter what side of the fence people find themselves on. We have this common ground. And, one thing we're really hoping with the movie is that it, just like with conservation game, it starts to promote more conversations about what's the best future for this. If we take away the zoo model and all the stuff, the human stuff surrounding it, what's best for the animals, as is. And so
Yeah,
I think,
we
you
have to
know, we,
evolve. We have to evolve. The zoos have to evolve, and they have. Listen, give zoos credit where credit is due. Zoos are not like they were in the 1960s, and the science of animals is not where it was in the 1960s. So we're evolving, but that does not justify the fabrication of the truth, right? And like you said, I think informed consent is really my issue with zoos. My biggest issue with zoos really is that it's based on this facade, selling it to the public that, oh, you go to the zoo with your family and you spend your dollars and you buy a plush and you eat your food and you feed the giraffe and all that, and that money is going to help save all those species in the wild. And that is absolutely nonsense. It is nonsense, and it's a lie. And so that's the problem I had was, listen, if the AZA or ZEA came out and said, listen, we're a place you can come see animals, and that's it. We do some good with the species in the wild, but don't sell yourself as being the savior of animals in the wild when you're really just a business about making. Look at the IRS 990s of zoos and look where the dollars go. Who's making the money? The CEOs are generally making well into the six figures, and all the higher ups. So I think I agree with you. We need to educate the public. Now, if the public becomes educated, just like I say, I told all of the people I did tours for, and when I went in the sanctuary world and was a host for thousands of tours, I said, listen, once I give you my soapbox spiel, and I know I'm a little of an altruist, but once I give you that spiel, if you decide that, hey, listen, and I know people like this, the supporters of sanctuaries said, that's okay, I still support zoos. As long as you make your decisions based on information. So I think that you never make a right or a wrong decision. You make the best decision, but you can only make the best decision based on information. My concern is that probably the vast majority of the general public is making the decision to go to a zoo based on a lack of truth and knowledge of how a zoo operates. And that's why I always promoted the fact, I said, take a behind the scenes tour, please. All zoos conduct them. Take it and sanctuaries as well. Take a behind the scenes tour, and you're going to have a better feel for, we called it the other side of the zoo. You'll have a better feel for how the real side of the zoo is operating. It's nothing like the front. You go to the zoo, you look at the animals in beautiful enclosure, the yards, you got waterfalls and rocks and pretty grass and everything's pretty. Think about it, and then the visitors leave thinking, wow, that animal has a beautiful life, right? What most of the general public doesn't realize that the vast majority of animals in a zoo, sentient creatures that are held captive for the rest of their lives, are kept in night houses overnight. And a night house is just a behind the scenes concrete and steel cage, and it varies in its size. Our Sumatran tigers would leave, and it was a tiny public yard where it had a beautiful water moat, and it had trees and it had shade areas, but it's very, very small, even probably smaller than our primate yard. And generally we'd have two Sumatran tigers out, and then we had more than two Sumatran tigers. So what you did, you shifted the others to the night house in the back, and those concrete cells, I kid you not, those cells where the animals spend the night for the Sumatran tigers was probably 10 feet wide by 20, 25 feet deep. You have a night house, the animals are locked up overnight, and then in the morning before the public comes, the animal caretakers are in like 7 a.m. They go out to the public yard, they scoop all the feces out, they clean up all the water pools, they do all the nice stuff to make it polished and pretty for the public. And then at 9 o'clock when the zoo opens, they open the shift gates from the night houses, shift the animals out into their public enclosures, close the shift gate, which locks them out of their night houses. And then all day long, the same animal caretakers are working dedicated to clean the night houses, do food prep, do all that kind of stuff. And then at the end of the day, 5:30, the zoo closes, and they shift the animals back, they feed them, and that process is repeated 7 days a week, 365 days a year, almost without change, because that's how else would you take care of both areas? You have to shift the animals out of a night house to clean it. You have to shift the animals out of a public yard, the public display, to clean that. So it's a process, but I would bet that the vast majority of the general public doesn't know that animals they spend as much of their lives locked in a concrete and steel cell as they do in that pretty little yard.
With the Harambe, we feel bad for everybody that was involved. We know that there's not one person that works at that zoo that walked away that day without a heavy burden that they'll have their whole lives. And I can only imagine, the tragedy and the conflict and the fear and the terror and everything that's going through their minds, and in the movie, we make it a point that we're not trying to second guess what they did or how they went about it. I think the bigger question for us is, should we even have these situations where this may occur? And I'm really curious, when Harambe came around, do you remember like where you were when you heard it, or what your reaction was when you heard about Harambe?
I don't remember. I was in Florida at the time. I was working. It struck me just like the deaths at our zoo. It struck me like Zanesville when all the exotic animals got out in Ohio and they shot and killed. Law enforcement had to shoot and kill all the exotic animals in Ohio. It struck me. It becomes, to be quite honest with you, it becomes post-traumatic for us. It becomes very difficult to experience again because it takes us right back. So Harambe, and you're right, everybody becomes a victim. The family that was there, their child that fell in. Harambe is the greatest victim. You just can't begin to put a value on any sentient creature, and to see one shot and killed in front of that. I agree with you. Whether you're in the operations side of the zoo or the animal caretaking side, anybody associated with the zoo is going to be absolutely traumatized, just as the case. But it continues to happen. Correct me if I'm wrong. When I was reading the follow-up reports of the zoo and the railing, and again, they tried to minimize it, and there were no deficiencies in the public railing or anything like that. But then the follow-up, the USDA, didn't they cite them or something for it wasn't a tall enough public railing? And I mean, that's still not going to stop somebody from getting in, but still, you got to have a standard. If you're not meeting that standard, that's just a flagrant. It should be a red flag for anybody that, how could that happen in the first place?
Their response has been interesting. The zoo would not speak to us. We asked them several times for interviews. The moment that we mentioned we were making the movie, they reached out to tell us they didn't like Jeff McCurry. They've been very vocal and interactive, but very distant from us, and which we find a shame because we always wanted a conversation. And that's what this is all leading to. And we realize they'll never engage.
Nope.
Because there's too many secrets that I think if you pull one string, suddenly everything starts coming out.
Yep. It's all about power and control. All about power and control. And they're protecting the almighty dollar. I mean, you talk about the safety, the railings. Just a month ago, less than a month ago, a person at the Columbus Zoo, a visitor, while the cheetah yard demonstration was getting ready to go on, climbed the fence and fell over the fence into the cheetah yard. I mean, listen, having worked at a zoo, the enclosures are generally not created safe enough. They're created so you can see animals, right? But my belief is if a zoo is going to be a business based on animal, supposedly conservation and welfare, then it's your duty and obligation you should be creating exhibits that, number one, the animal's safe and it's never going to have to, run the risk of being shot like Harambe or Inshallah, or, listen, it's happening every single, quarter or 6 months where across the country, some significant animals, I'm telling you, the smaller animals are getting out on a regular basis. The big animals are getting out and they're getting shot and killed. It's happening on a regular basis. And it's just not acceptable, right? So before I forget the thought is, back to that keeper at our zoo in Tampa, they've been put in a position they shouldn't have been put in. And it's a business, right? So if you're short staffed, you're going to be cutting corners. So you're going to be making mistakes. That's how human errors happen. If you look at all the escapes, generally the escapes are human error, right? Because you're pushing these people to do too much. You're giving them too many animals under their care, or you're giving them too many too few employees. It's disaster that is not just waiting to happen. It's happening, so it's not going to stop. And the AZA is very controlled. Again, they're doing far more good than harm. But why won't they engage you? Why wouldn't they engage us? It's power control. They don't want any outside input. It's a very, very close-knit political community.
What do you think would be another good step that we could take to try to help these endangered captive animals maybe be repatriated back to where they're from, or how do you think we can proceed forward?
Yeah, I'd like to be as an altruist. I'd like to believe, I never give up hope that the AZA and ZA are primarily 99% based on captive conservation. That's another fallacy that probably the general public, most of them are not aware of, is that these animals aren't going back to the wild. They never were intended to go back to the wild. The breeding is done for captive conservation. It's done to keep them in a zoo for the rest of their lives. Now, granted, there are small and few exceptions. And the AZA is always quick to promote those, like 4 or 5 species that they've saved from extinction, but not justify the captive conservation of the hundreds of other species and SSPs, species survival plans, that they keep captive. But for the most part, if you go to a zoo, just a ballpark guess would be that probably 98 or 99% of the species in a zoo, they're not endangered. They're just there because the zoo wants the more animals and more species, the better. And so then you end up with that, like you mentioned, there's too many animals. You don't have enough room in the night houses. You have to shift animals around. I don't think the AZA, at least not in my lifetime, certainly the AZA and ZA, they're never going to evolve to be organizations that work toward breeding species to be released back into the wild. And that's where I've tried to redirect my speech, is that if you want to support actual conservation and wildlife management, you find an organization that has boots on the ground in Antarctica or in Asia or in Africa or any country where these animals, snow leopards in Tibet, and donate to those organizations. Those are the ones your dollar is going to be most effectively managed towards saving those endangered species. Not attending a zoo is not going to save any species, and those zoos have no interest. Their operation plan is never going to be to put any significant number of species or animals back into the wild ever. It's not going to happen in my lifetime. So I think the most powerful change that can be made is exactly what you're doing with the film Harambe, and I can't tell you how it impacted me. And one of the reasons I was so impressed is that it wasn't just about the tragedy of Harambe. It was about so many worldwide issues regarding conservation. It was brilliant because that's the conversation we need to be having. That's the conversation that zoos need to be having with the public every single day, not putting a sign up in front of a gorilla exhibit that says this is a lowland gorilla or this is a silverback or this. That nobody's going to go away empowered to do something about actual gorilla conservation. So I think that the AZA and ZA are negligent in not putting more focus on actual conservation in the wild and empowering the public to be a positive difference. You'll hear like bowling for rhinos. So this is So that's your big conservation initiative, is you're going to have a fundraiser to go to a bowling alley to raise funds for rhinos in the wild. So that's going to say, so no species on planet Earth is going to be saved unless we save habitat. The greatest challenge to all species on planet Earth, including humans, is loss of habitat, lack of habitat, right? So that's where you start. And we donate, and we have good friends that got us turned on to this, is that if you don't save the habitat, there's nowhere in the future, even if you altruistically want to believe that zoos are going to begin to evolve and save these species and breed them and release them. Well, if there's no wild left, there's no way that's going to happen. So starting day one, like 50 years ago, people need to start donating toward organizations that are saving and protecting habitat in the wild and hiring rangers to protect the animals from poachers. That's wildlife management. That's going to be sustainability for endangered animals, not putting them in zoos behind cages for public exhibition.
Beautifully said. I know you've told me before that captivity is not conservation. And that is just such
it's an oxymoron.
Explain it.
Yeah. So I think there's an impetus going. You see, with the great things that are happening in the world with what happened, as a result of Blackfish and the tragedy, and I still, and many people don't know that SeaWorld is AZA accredited too, and many people don't know that at one time in my tenure, while I was at our zoo, that the San Diego Zoo was taking their ambassador cheetahs to SeaWorld out west, and exhibiting them as ambassador animals. So there's that whole San Diego, SeaWorld is AZA accredited. So I'd never support SeaWorld. I'd never go there. But they are evolving, at least the orca, while it is evolving toward better. You're seeing the circuses go out of business, especially Ringling. Kudos to them, right? I know I personally had communications with people who were Ringling when I was working for Big Cat Rescue. And I actually had a good interaction with somebody within Ringling that was one of the assistants to one of the Feld daughters who was running the operation. Look where they've evolved. It can be done, right? So now they have the circuses come back out. There's no animals, and it's going to be a success, right? People just want to be entertained. It doesn't have to involve animals. So you're seeing these things happen. The Big Cat Public Safety Act has passed. You're seeing all these milestones that, to be quite frank, I didn't think I'd see in my lifetime. Mm-hmm. So we have that impetus moving forward, and it is our responsibility to take this message, whether it be a tragedy in the case of Harambe or any of the animals that we've seen suffer as a result of captive life. But we have that powerful tool now. We can educate the public, and it's both the zoo's responsibility, and I don't believe they're stepping up to the plate as they should be. So it's our responsibility to hold them accountable. And I as I said in the conservation game, challenge accepted. I'll go to my grave trying to hold them accountable. And I tell you, from minute one, Dan Ash, the president CEO of the AZA, has never reached out to me in the communications I sent to him about the ambassador animals. Because listen, animals are going to be, for the rest of my life, animals are going to be held in zoos. That's a reality. I'm just going to make it my life mission to hold the zoo accountable, to hold them to higher standards. So I'll give you an example. Ambassador animals, ambassador animals are everything from small reptiles, and they're usually the most exploited. If you go see the alligators or the tarantulas and all the other small species of animal, but all the way up to the larger animal, the cheetahs. So you've got cheetahs, clouded leopards, you've got servals, caracals, bobcats. All those species of cat are currently continuing to be exploited at AZA and ZA accredited zoos at the end of a leash as an ambassador animal. They breed them. They purposely pull them from their mothers after birth to bottle feed them, to human imprint them purposely, and then put them at the end of a leash to take out to events, for photo ops, for all these nefarious reasons. I think the ZA will never meet this standard, but the AZA has potential to make a statement. If they're the gold standard, stop purposely breeding all your exotic cats and putting them on the end of a leash as an ambassador. That's the cornerstone. if you're not, until you're willing to do that, I'm not going to stop coming after you. It's unacceptable. These animals, especially the smaller animals and the reptiles, in our, because you go to a zoo, you say, well, wait, now the ambassador animal's gone. Where do they go? Well, they're behind the scenes, right? They don't have a public yard. They go back to basically what's a dog crate, if they're lucky. In our zoo, it was chain link runs for the larger mammals. We didn't have any cats at the time as an ambassador animal, but we had, we had kinkajous and we had porcupines and we had, I think we had a bintur, like it wasn't a bintur, but they go back to just like dog runs, concrete floors, chain link runs. But the reptiles and smaller animals, they're lucky if they've got a 5-gallon aquarium, and some of them had Tupperware containers. And that's where ambassador animals of those species go back to. So they're sometimes the most neglected and exploited species because they're small and easy to manage. Whereas you start getting the bigger mammals, then it's, well, we got to give them a little more room. But I guarantee you, the animals in an ambassador animal department, even the big cats, the cheetahs, generally have, they're going to get put in a night cage or a night run. So I think that the AZA needs to step in. If they don't, again, then fine, challenge accepted.
Again, if anybody watching this has not seen The Conservation Game yet, go watch it right now. It is an amazing movie, and it's an amazing peek into a lot of breeding issues that are happening, and plus the ambassador animal argument. Now the zoos make that all the time. We need the giraffe so that people have an animal they can come see, and that's going to make them love this animal in Africa and somehow save them from going extinct. What do you think about this zoo's sort of PR push that ambassador animals are helpful?
It's nonsense. I mean, so and one of the challenges is there's not been any really large scale, unbiased scientific studies done. There's a lot of smaller studies, where they have a small sampling of a small number of zoos or a small number of species, and 200 people in the guests that were interviewed before and after, during and afterwards. I don't think ambassador animals are necessary. They always say it affects in the guests going away more engaged and more likely to become someone who's going to go out and become an advocate and donate money or something to save that animal, that species in the wild. And like the giraffes, you're right. They keep expanding what an ambassador animal is that most of the zoos now have a platform that you can go and feed the giraffe, romaine lettuce or something. And we had it at our zoo as well. They're not making, I can tell you, having worked at a zoo that had these departments where, it's whether you feed the giraffe or you feed the stingrays in the petting tank or you feed whatever species it is. I can tell you, having worked for the visitor services department of our zoo, been up in management, we're not making enough money off the feeding to make a significant, that first of all, you feed a giraffe at a zoo, they're not taking that giraffe donation money and it's not going back to a fund to save giraffes in the wild. It's going to the zoo's bottom line, right? So I actually don't believe that ambassador animals are needed. Pet the stingrays, you feed them, you put it up, let them eat it. It's just money to sell the fish, right? It's like the Moldamatics. They just want an extra quarter or 50 cents or dollar coming into the zoo. It's leveraging income, revenue. It has no direct impact on actual conservation in the wild. It's nonsense. And so just another perspective from my view is, I think, zoos, like I mentioned, have evolved tremendously. They're not like the 1960s when I was going as a kid. But, so I always think that zoos should continue to improve the animal habitats. Absolutely, hands down. But what you're seeing, if you watch over and over, you'll see zoos making these big spiels, and they're opening 10 and 20 and $30 million exhibits for one species, maybe 6 to 12 animals. Now, I am 100% behind them making an improvement to that animal's display yard. They're probably not making an improvement to the night houses, but at least that yard, the public display is more naturalistic. It's got more features. Hopefully it's more enrichment involved, trying to engage the animal senses and keep them healthier. But I think, in my humble opinion, is that instead of building a $10 million exhibit to put half dozen animals out, how about you build a really nice $5 million exhibit and donate the other $5 million in donations to actual conservation in the wild by 1,000 acres in Africa, or hire rangers to help protect those endangered species. I think there's a better use of money, and what the zoos are using that funds, what they're using the money is strictly to increase their income. That is money poorly spent. Like, you can improve the animals' quality of life and improve their habitats in the zoo because you've enslaved them for their lives. I mean, they have no choice, right? None of those animals chose to be bred and put in a cage for their life. But if you're going to do that, how about instead of building, these extravagant exhibits, build a really nice exhibit, spend half the money, and then really use that money. But if you go through the 990s, brings up a good subject. If they're all about conservation, there's no large scale study done auditing of AZA or ZA accredited zoos to actually pinpoint how much they're donating to specific actual conservation initiatives in the wild, right? There's ballparks, and the best ballpark that I've been able to nail down over the last 10 years is generally, on average, AZA accredited zoos might be donating between 2 and 5% of their gross annual revenue toward actual conservation in the wild. But where you'll see those statistics exaggerated, and in my opinion, just it's a lie to the public, is you can call a lot of things conservation, right? So you can wrap in your education department, you can wrap in all these other things and call that, well, the money's going toward that. Well, your zoo school, how's that actually helping the endangered species in the wild? It's not, but they'll call it conservation. So when they donate that money, it's actually not going toward conservation in the wild. It's going toward their zoo school so they can educate kids. So and that's babysitting. Having gone through that whole zoo school process when we started ours up, because we didn't have one when I first started. But so I think that it's money poorly spent, and I think if we hold them accountable, I think listen, if you guys hadn't done what you've done with Harambe and put this back out, he would have died. I guarantee he would have been forgotten. But your efforts are gonna force the zoo to be held accountable, to keep it in the public light, which is what we need to do, because that's the only, I'm a little ant, right? So the zoo's not gonna, Dan Ash isn't gonna respond to me. I'm just somebody here in Georgia, born and raised in Florida, now in Georgia, that is probably a little nuisance, a little gnat on his scope. But when I do my advocacy calls for action, I've got all the contacts of all the point of contacts within the AZA, including Dan Ash, and every single one includes all of their contacts, their emails, their phone numbers, and I will be a gnat in them until they respond. If he doesn't want to respond, great, then I'm going to become a deer fly. If he doesn't respond to that, I'm going to become something bigger, and I'm going to sting them until they're forced to respond. And what your film is going to help us do is to make them respond. It is their responsibility to respond. Not one in Michael Weber's award-winning film that I had the privilege of being a part of, Conservation Game, not one faux conservationist that we exposed, not one organization that we exposed, except I guess I could say the Columbus Zoo finally did respond. Nobody else made a public statement. Nothing. They were radio silent, and they continue to be radio silent, and they just wanted to go away, just swish you under the rug, and like the tragedy of Harambe. Oh, swish him. Everybody will forget about it, and inshallah and Zoo Tampa. They promised the employees, we're going to create a memorial. Never did it. And here's that distinction again between an animal caretaker and the operations side. So like you say, Harambe, it's wow, he's got a name, right? That sentient creature has a name. Not to the zoo. He does to the zookeepers, because every animal in their collection entrusted to their care is a living sentient creature. But if you go in the commissary, in our commissary, we had a dry erase board, and it was divided down the middle, and it was incoming and outgoing, and there weren't names, and we had animals coming and going on a weekly basis, if not daily basis. There were no names there. It's a number. That's all they are, is numbers. I guarantee you, you look at a stud book, well, yeah, the names are oftentimes thrown in there, but their true identity is just a number. And isn't that a sad statement in 2023, that a sentient creature entrusted to a gold standard AZA accredited zoo is really just a number, just like the dollar that they're trying to bring in from the visiting guest? I am so thrilled when I saw you guys having the upcoming streaming premiere of your magnificent film. I can't wait, because it's gonna open so many eyes. Because again, to anybody watching this podcast, it's not just about the tragic story of Harambe. It's about a worldwide issue of conservation and some fabulous, really inspirational, very respected individuals that are interviewed in the film. It's powerful. In fact, I as I shared with you, I got a little distracted because it got me going, about gorilla conservation, got me going about, all these things in the wild. It was brilliant, because that's what we need. It's not just a documentary about Harambe. It's about captive conservation, and okay, how can we all be a positive influence? So I'm really excited when you and your team reached out to me. I think it didn't just happen. I think we're all universally guided and divinely guided together to make a positive difference in the world, right? Animal, human, eco, right? It's all connected. We're all connected, right? Where did we lose? Where did they stop teaching that? That it's like, well, it's not, animals aren't just animals, and people aren't just people, and the environment isn't just the environment. It's all interconnected. Let's start focusing on that, not putting cheetahs on leashes or putting gorillas in zoos just so the family can go and look, it's a gorilla, and then go away and have absolutely no contribution to the welfare of that species in the wild until they see your film. Because your film it taught me things I didn't know. Let's be heard loud and clear. And I've always said, one of my taglines is that collectively, we will not be denied or defeated in seeking to be the voice of our sentient animal friends that cannot speak for themselves. And I truly believe in that, and I truly believe that we can accomplish that.
Ah, that's beautiful. Beautifully said. I agree 100%. And it's been such an honor to have you on today, to be able to talk to you, to be able to become friends with you.
Yeah.
And we've talked about so many different topics, and there are still so many more. Yeah. Like I said, I definitely think we need to, it's going to be worthy of a movie. So
yeah,
we'll continue to fight.
And we've talked about some other exciting ideas too. Absolutely. Listen, the momentum's there, and just tremendous respect to you and your team, because I know, having, I was never in the film world, right? So animals were my world, and activism. And so then I kind of morphed into the film world with Michael Weber and the conservation game. I have mad respect and admiration for you and your team, because I know the sacrifices and the risks that you guys took to produce that film. And I can't wait to see that. See, I've watched the reviews of the screenings and all that, but man, when it hits the mainstreaming, I can't wait for the press to pick it up. I can't wait to see the public's reaction, because they're going to be blown away by it.
So, Jeff, thank you so much for being here today. Amazing information, amazing to hear what really goes on in the zoos, and we look forward to having you back on as well, if possible. We'd love to talk to you some more. So thanks for being here today.
Yeah, happy to, and just reach out to me, and I'm looking forward to. Remind me again, because we're going to put what's the date of the streaming release?
November 1st, and we're going to be on Films for Action. Then we'll be expanding out to Amazon Prime after that pretty shortly.
Very nice.
So
it's perfect, because you're kind of lined as it's going to hit the holiday period. People are going to have some vacation time. They're going to have some lunch. Get the family gather out. Get some popcorn, and educate your family about this powerful, impactful story and message that needs to be carried forth about Harambe.
Thank you. It is amazing to hear your take on it. We really appreciate that.
Cool.
All right, Jeff. Thank you so much. We'll talk to you very soon.
Until next time.
All right. See you soon, Jeff.
Take care.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that was Jeff Kremer, one of the most amazing animal activists that I have had the pleasure to speak to, become friends with, talk to, and engage with. And, you know, again, if you have not seen The Conservation Game, you must watch that movie. It is an absolutely amazing investigative report into how animals are used and abused. And, you know, the whole thing, and you'll see it in Conservation Game, and Jeff talked about it today, we need to reframe our way of thinking towards the animals and towards the sentient beings that we share this earth with. You know, it was really interesting. You know, he was talking about go behind the scenes. Don't look at the animals through the walls and through the barriers that are created. You know, the concept that an animal's here and we're there and there's a barrier just goes to show that in nature, we're not even supposed to be near each other. And that's okay. Maybe we need to change our expectations that we cannot see a rhino in Chicago. Maybe our expectations that there are no polar bears in Iowa. You know, we've lost the plot. We've skidded off the road a bit. And people like Jeff are fighting to put us back on track. So thank you for joining, everybody. It was an amazing talk, and we look forward to continuing our Harambe talks. So, you know, keep an eye out. We have another one coming up with Peter Egan and another one coming up with the rest of our crew to talk a little bit more about Harambe talks and all the subjects surrounding the movie, captivity, zoos, and the future. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. Take care. Talk soon.